moving on here. As always, on the 1st of July, people showed up at Wonderland Ave at that house. This is not the cops. This is not the mover.
Yeah.
This is people who want their drugs.
Yeah.
As in, I need to get my fix, show up. And nobody answers the door, and it seems that the door at this point was unlocked and open because people apparently were wandering through the house and going, oh, look, there's blood everywhere, and they're dead. Hey,
I'm going to ransack the place.
I'm going to ransack the place.
Yeah.
I can get some money I can sell this stuff to get some drugs, and maybe they got drugs, and maybe they got money, and so
all their buddies see the corpses and don't call the cops. They just ransack the place.
Yeah, and so people were just
made
made the crime scene just that much more difficult for the police. I watched a video with, I think it was the chief at the time, and you could tell that he was friggin' livid over the fact that people, and he didn't like addicts, I could tell that, and he was just super mad that they had been going through the house while all these people were dead. And just didn't care.
I mean, it's hard a little bit. I think if you're a drug addict, a lot of times you aren't thinking, I'm going to pull the Steve here,
clearly.
right? You're not thinking clearly and rationally.
Mm-hmm.
So you show up to your drug dealer's house, who's known drug dealers, and you're there, in the morning or whatever, and you see that they're murdered. And you call the cops, and they say, okay, like this is the scenario you run through in your head, right? You're like, okay, well, if I call the cops are going to ask what I'm doing here, and I
don't have a good reason
to be here. So, you guys were cool. I'm sorry that this happened to you, but I would rather not get thrown in jail. I'm going to be a suspect. They're going to book me. I'm going to be in jail for the rest of my life.
I'm not going to do drugs for a while.
Yeah, I totally understand them just walking away. I totally.
But also,
I
there's
would do
such
the
a
same
thing as
probably.
anonymous 911 calls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about it is those guys had every reason to believe that somebody just like him was going to show up 20 minutes later, an hour later, and discover the bodies. So they just figure, hey, I'll do a quick search, see if I can find some smack or a little cash, and then just leave.
I do want to say something because we're about to go into. We're going to dive pretty deep into some drug-addled behavior, some junkie behavior, and it's going to come clear. I'm just going to be honest about this. I don't like junkies, and that's a personal belief. I have problems with them. Now, there are people who think differently than I and believe that you shouldn't blame someone who is suffering from an addiction.
Well,
I don't agree with that. So my point is, I'm saying this now. Let's agree to disagree. Please don't send me emails to correct my thinking.
Yeah,
it's just my belief based on my experiences in life.
Yeah, I'll say this, and that is, it happens to the best of us. It really
does. It happens to great people, and it happens to not so great people. And let's just leave it there, and let's move forward with the story.
I guess I was just going to add that it is my sense that these people, drug-addled or not, were not necessarily good people anyway.
They were not.
And so... I think what Steve is trying to say is that this is not a sweeping generalization of everybody who's ever done drugs ever. We're just talking about these people, and we are probably gonna forget and use some more offensive
it's going to come across, if we're not careful, as bashing, and if it does, it's unintentional. But
we're also
please,
sitting in a studio drinking beer. So sorry guys, but
we're only drinking beer.
Here's our disclaimer. It's not a sweeping generalization, even when it sounds like it.
Okay, so let's move on. I want to talk. So we talked about all these lovely folks who have come through the house and probably sifted through their belongings. Let's talk about a very well-known person who frequented the house on Wonderland Avenue.
Yeah, he was in and out of there all the time.
Yeah, and that would be John Holmes. Yes, John Holmes of the 13.5-inch notoriety.
Yeah, he was known for one thing.
He's a very big star.
Yeah, he is. Or he was, I should say.
And he had a long career, and...
kind of really a big width of a career as well.
It was.
Yeah.
It really was.
It just spanned a lot of different...
He had the whole hog.
Mm-hmm.
On a really odd side note here before we get too much into John Holmes. Anyway, on a side note, this somehow has turned out to be the second story in a row where I've had Val Kilmer playing the lead role of the person in my story.
Well, isn't that the new theme of our podcast?
No!
Val Kilmer movies?
No!
Well, it should be.
Because he was in the Lion one that I did last time.
Yeah, No Ghost in the Darkness.
Yeah, and he was in a movie called Wonderland portraying John Holmes, which I will not recommend anybody watch. It doesn't hold up.
Just a conspiracy.
Oh, is he in... It's a conspiracy?
He was in a movie called Conspiracy, but, you know.
Okay.
He was in a lot of movies.
Oh, well.
He also, you know, I think it's easy to find films with Val Kilmer. I mean, you know, given his, like, really tragic past of, you know, both of his parents being murdered.
Yeah, that's right.
And him, like, really facing his deepest fear of bats.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely another one of his good movies. Okay. If anybody has ever seen the movie Boogie Nights, that is loosely based on the life of John Holmes.
It's alright. It's okay. You can... No?
Oh, you can keep going. I'll definitely not cut that.
Anyway.
But yeah, no. If some of the stuff that we talk about sounds familiar, if you've seen that movie, it's because it was modeled after his life. And we're now going to have to wait till Devin and Joe finish their musical interlude.
Actually, that song was put to best effect in Airplane.
Okay, let's not get off track here.
All right.
Was that not in Boogie Nights?
It may have been.
It might have been. It was an Airplane. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm done.
It's obvious we haven't done this in a while.
Yeah.
We're friggin' loopy and we're 15 minutes in.
Not back in our groove yet, sorry.
Okay. For those who don't know about John Holmes, he was a porn star. He began his career as a nude model in the mid to late 60s and then moved over into making pornography in the 70s. Because of the size of his package, he was an instant star.
Yeah.
Kind of a freak show.
He was a huge star.
Yeah, I heard the story about his first. He actually proposed this to this producer and said, "Hey, I'd like to be a porn star." And the guy took a look at him because, let's face it, he didn't have a manly physique.
No, and there was nothing great. He wasn't handsome by any manner of means.
No,
like
and a
Ron
strong
Jeremy.
little body. Yeah. I think
Ron Jeremy was much better looking than Holmes.
Right, I just mean, like,
Yeah, but it's...
the porcupine head. Or the hedgehog, that's what it is.
Yeah, but so this guy looks at Holmes and just says, no, I don't think I'm interested. And then Holmes drops his pants and it's like, oh, I guess we will. Okay.
Yeah, well,
now I'm interested.
Yeah.
Yes, we are going to make a lot of films together,
and
big
they
sir.
did.
They did.
Yeah.
So many films.
Thousands of films.
He was in over 2,000 pornos in his lifetime. He says that he slept with over 14,000 women. Now, that's by Holmes's account.
And he was a notorious liar, by the way. But I'm
Yeah.
sure it was thousands. I had no doubt about that.
That's a hard part. We'll get into his lying here shortly.
I mean, if he was in 2,000 pornos, he probably slept. I mean, I don't know.
Well,
so here,
at least 1,000.
Yeah.
Let me give you this here. So he was in pornos. He was doing nude modeling. He would he'd pimp himself out. He would have sex with people for money, and later on it turns out he was having sex for drugs because John Holmes was a giant coke fiend.
A huge coke fiend.
Yeah, he was.
Massive coke fiend.
I am actually surprised the guy's heart didn't just explode. I mean, he was doing that stuff in such quantities.
You know what?
He loved doing really long lines.
He obviously had a very strong heart to be able to perform in that field the way he did.
Yeah.
God, there's so many freaking jokes here. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
According to Holmes, he was a huge coke fiend, and he was. This is just kind of his money aspect of it, because Holmes made a lot of claims. As Joe said, he was kind of a notorious liar. He claimed at one point that he was making $750,000 a year. This is in the 70s, mind you, which that's got to be over $1 million, $1.5 million in today's money, at least.
Probably more like several million, actually.
Yeah, but he was, because he was making all that money from, like I said, through movies, photos, and turning tricks.
Yeah,
private events. He called them private events.
Yeah, I don't know if it was $750, but I'm sure he was making a pile of money.
He was making a huge pile of money.
I'm sure he was. Too bad he flushed it all down the toilet on drugs.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is that when John Holmes first got into the industry, he didn't smoke, or he smoked cigarettes, but he didn't do anything else.
Yeah, not even pot.
And then he started doing pot, and he started doing Quaaludes, and he started doing coke, and it just progressively got more and more and more.
4.5 million.
4.5 million.
Right.
Jeez.
Okay. I guess the guy had kind of an addictive personality. He certainly seemed addicted to sex.
Yeah. And by the end of the 70s, into the early 80s, he had progressed his usage, had progressed to the point that he was freebasing cocaine, which is the equivalent of crack, as far as I understand. And he was, he's taking as many drugs as he can. He was known. This is how much drugs this guy would take. He was known for carrying a briefcase at all times, and in that briefcase was his drugs and his paraphernalia. Mm-hmm. And he was taking a hit every 5 to 15 minutes.
Yeah. Must be nice.
Well, it had a negative side effect, which is that his main claim to fame was no longer functional.
Yeah, huge drawback.
Surprising. Yeah.
A huge downfall.
Yeah.
A huge liability. I mean, it was
a flaccid mark on his record.
It was actually kind of small and flaccid at that point.
Well, relatively small. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's still.
No one's that much
bigger
of a
than my
grower.
arm. But anyway, so.
But yeah, when you show up in the set and you can't perform well.
Well, the problem was that he couldn't perform. He also only wanted to do drugs, so they couldn't find him, and then they'd find him, and he was just high as a kite. So he got blacklisted. People gave him chances, and eventually everybody was like, dude, get out. We don't care. Now, they called him the King, and the King had left the building.
Yeah,
the King had been kicked out of the building.
He was truly the king of porn there for a while, but by the end they were joking that the only way to get him on the set was to leave a trail of cocaine.
They did.
Yeah.
So at this point, he's gone from making all of this money to not being able to work, but he's still got this massive addiction, and he's got to figure out how to support it. At one point, he took to stealing from cars, stealing stuff out of cars.
Sure.
He would also go to Los Angeles International Airport and walk up to baggage claim and just grab a couple bags and walk away to sell what he found in the bag.
Yeah, I know this seems silly, but I just don't understand why people don't do that these days, though.
I think there's more security.
Yeah, I think
there's not that much security around baggage claim.
I think there's more security than you realize.
I mean, there's cameras.
And I've stood at baggage claim and waited for people, and I've noticed the security just because I'm standing around.
Okay, all right.
I don't know when I was at that age, because I was alive back then. It was typically kind of a spot check kind of thing.
Yeah.
You could get busted. There might be a guy that'll walk up and say, "Hey, can I check your ticket against your bag?" But not always.
Yeah, not always.
Probably,
and you could just drop the bags and run, and the guy was most likely just going to pick the bags up and put them back on the carousel.
Oh, sure.
So at this point, like I said, he's stealing to make money. He, scumbag that he is, he's also doing some other really terrible things. Holmes was married when he got into the porn business, and his wife was not down with it.
Well, I like the way he just sort of he started doing porns without telling her, and then one day he comes home and says, "Hey, I found my calling in life." And she says, "Really? What is it?" "I want to be a porn star." And
I just want to sleep with a bunch of other ladies on camera for money.
Yeah, and she was not okay with it.
I understand.
But she didn't divorce him.
That's what I don't understand.
They were married for 10 years. They were together. She didn't sleep with him after he started performing.
This is going to seem really, really jaded, probably. But I totally understand. If she even saw a couple of them and saw his upward trajectory and was able to realize that he was probably going to make a lot of money doing porn, if she waited to divorce him, she could make a bigger claim on what he's living, quote unquote.
And
that's a good point.
And you know, I know that they were married for 10 years. I never looked at, I think that by the time she divorced him, he was a total addict and he had dime zero.
Yeah, but I'm sure she could make that. I mean, she could at the very least be making a claim against more of
Well, you can sue a guy who has $0 for $1 million and you're still going to end up with zero.
Absolutely. But if he ever comes back into money, he owes you a lot of back stuff.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Hi. I hope our listeners aren't judging me right now.
Yeah, they are. But I got to say, in the end, it was a bad call on her part because he would up costing her a pile of money.
I agree.
He came and went, and he used her a lot.
Like the time he stole her credit card and charged up $30,000
or something like that.
Of TVs.
Yeah, and then turned around and sold it all.
Yeah.
Okay, so we were a little off track here. We were talking about.
So he was married.
So he was married, and he was out of money, and he needed to find a way to make money. And it turns out he wasn't above pimping out his girlfriend, Dawn. By the way, he started dating Dawn when she was 15.
And he was?
He was a 25, 30-year-old man at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And
reminds me of Ken McElroy.
And by the time that he started pimping her out, they had been together for 5 years, so she was now 20.
Well,
and
at least
totally hooked on coke.
Yeah.
He hooked her on drugs, and then he put her on the street. And there are some terrible interviews of the things that he would do. So he did really bad things with a lot of people, and everybody in the business kind of hated him. Yeah. There's an interview I was watching where somebody was talking about the fact that what a massive liar he was, and they said John Holmes lied as much as he breathed.
Mm-hmm.
He would open his mouth and garbage would come out, and he was known for screwing people over that he knew. There was an interview I watched where a lady said, yeah, we made the mistake of telling John we were going to be gone running errands in the morning and not home till noon. And they came home at noon, and their house was empty.
Yeah,
like
she said
everything.
She said that basically anything that was worth more than maybe $3 or $4 he had taken.
Yeah,
I gotta tell you, after researching his life and after watching that BBC documentary, I just wanted to spray myself with disinfectant.
BBC documentary.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's pretty easy to say at this point that Holmes was not going to win any Man of the Year awards.
No, he was completely skeezy.
And so he was connected to the Wonderland gang.
He was. What happens here is that Holmes is connected. The cops on the 10th of July, they had figured out that Holmes was one of the known characters that went around that house. And they found he and Dawn holed up in a hotel on the 10th of July. And they went in and they grabbed him. And Holmes, at least at first, told them a story that they really liked, which we'll get into here shortly. He tells them this story. He says, you've got to protect me. You got to put me in witness protection. You got to do all this stuff. Get Dawn, get my wife, lock us all up so we're safe, yada, yada, yada.
All three of us.
All three. And they do. They all are in a suite with the police for like 2 weeks.
Yeah,
then he clams up and he won't tell the police anything else. And the little bits he gives them, he is changing the story. And it's all morphing, and eventually the Los Angeles Police Department has had enough of him, and they cut him free. Like, we give up, dude. We're done with you. Get out. We're not protecting you. You're not telling us anything.
Yeah.
Because he did. He just completely clammed up with these, oh, well, I can't tell you because it's going to be a danger to everybody, and blah, 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 blah. I mean, just a typical garbage. There's another word I was going to try and say there. I killed him. So,
yeah. He was not a reliable person.
No, he wasn't. And so they let him go. Eventually, though, the cops would decide that Holmes must be the responsible party. through one form or another in the Wonderland murders.
Well, he was connected. They found a palm print, you know.
So the cops hauled him in, and they had to chase him down to Florida to get him, but they eventually found him.
Florida man strikes again.
Yes. And they put him on trial, but he got off scot-free. They couldn't make the charges stick because the case was pretty circumstantial.
There's not any evidence, really.
Yeah.
A tiny amount, but not much.
So at this point, what we have in our story that we've spent all this time talking about is we have a house full of dead people and nobody who we can say for sure is responsible. So at this point, I think it's time to go to the theory machine.
Theory machine!
Theory number one is that this is the revenge plot